A river is born from mountains. It flows for hundreds of kilometers, carves canyons, cools deserts, and nourishes the cities, farmers, power plants, culture, and wildlife of a country. It is indispensable for people, ecosystems, and agriculture. But what happens if one day that same river can no longer reach the sea? The Colorado River has been at the heart of life in the American West for tens of thousands of years. Today, however, it is running out before ever reaching the ocean. This is not a random disaster. It is a crisis that directly threatens access to fresh water across the western United States. And it is the result of decades of laws, compacts, economic choices, and climate combined into one tragic story. So why did the Colorado River end up like this? Who has been consuming its water? Which decisions deepened the crisis? And what is being done about it? The Colorado River rises near the Rocky Mountains, fed by snowmelt from high peaks, and runs about 2,330 kilometers. Along the way, it carved out magnificent canyons, the most famous being the Grand Canyon. Its basin covers an area of 640,000 square kilometers. It is the backbone of a system that provides drinking water, irrigation, and energy for around 40 million people across 7 U.S. states, dozens of tribes, and 2 Mexican states. The river and its tributaries irrigate millions of hectares of farmland, generate hydropower, and once sustained desert ecosystems, especially the Delta. That is why Colorado is not just a waterway. It is an economic, cultural, and ecological spine. But climate change and overuse have broken the wings of the Colorado River. For the past 20 years, the entire basin has been suffering from severe drought. Rainfall has declined, winters have become shorter and drier. Scientific studies show that over the last century, the river's flow has decreased by about 20%, and more than half of that decline is due to climate change. Warmer years mean less snowpack in the mountains. Rising evaporation means much of the water is lost to the air. This is clearly visible in the reservoirs. Water levels in Lake Powell and Lake Mead have fallen to historic lows. In Lake Mead, the reservoir behind Hoover Dam, shorelines have dropped so far that white mineral bands known as bathtub rings stretch more than 40 meters high. Federal agencies are trying to keep the dams above minimum levels so power generation can continue, but this is getting harder with high consumption and low inflow. Future models predict that if emissions are not reduced, the river's flow could decline even more sharply by 2050. These findings reveal that the natural limits of the river as a resource are shrinking, but temperature alone does not explain everything. Human consumption, with canals, dams, hundreds of thousands of acres of irrigated agriculture, growing city demands, and groundwater pumping, traps and holds back the water and prevents it from returning. Both surface water and groundwater withdrawals have increased in recent years, and agriculture is by far the largest user. About 70 to 80% of the Colorado's water goes to irrigating farmland. Agriculture in the basin uses huge volumes, much of it for forage crops like alfalfa, cotton, and corn. For example, the Imperial Valley in California, known for alfalfa production, consumes almost its entire water allocation. For those unfamiliar, we will touch on what water allocation means separately. Just one large farming family draws more water than the entire city of Las Vegas. In these irrigations, often defended on the grounds of providing plant-based food, a large portion of the product obtained is actually used as feed crops like alfalfa and corn for cattle breeders. In 2022 alone, about 2.7 million acres of alfalfa were planted in the Colorado Basin. Irrigating this crop used about 2 trillion gallons of water, or 6.1 million acre-feet. These crops are grown both for domestic use and export. Alfalfa in particular is a high water demand crop. In some states, much of the alfalfa production is exported, especially to Asian markets. In effect, water is being turned into a physical product and exported out of the region as virtual water. This has led many experts to question the entire water economy of the American West. Satellite studies show that groundwater reserves in the basin are also declining rapidly. Pumping increases when surface water is low, especially during drought. Since the 2000s, groundwater losses in some areas have even outpaced surface water losses. This means the water debt is growing both above and below ground. To understand this imbalance, we need to look at how the river is divided. The Colorado River is managed through a complex web of compacts and laws, known as the Law of the River. The most important of these is the 1922 Colorado River Compact, which divided the river between 7 U.S. states. The compact split the basin into the upper basin and the lower basin, giving each 7.5 million acre-feet per year. California received 4.4, Arizona 2.8, Nevada 0.3, Colorado 3.86, Utah 1.71, Wyoming 1.04, and New Mexico 0.84 million acre-feet. But the first big mistake was here. The compact's allocation was based on unusually wet years in the early 1900s. Flows were assumed to average 16.4 million acre-feet a year. Later studies showed the long-term average was only 13 to 14. In other words, the compact promised more water than the river could actually provide. In addition, the 1944 U.S.-Mexico Water Treaty set aside 1.5 million acre-feet of water per year for Mexico. According to the U.S. Geological Survey and Bureau of Reclamation data, between 2000 and 2021, the river's actual average flow was about 12.3 million acre-feet, a full 25% below what the compact had assumed. Yet despite this, the annual 16.5 million acre-feet water usage shares recognized by the agreement remain valid. So how is the water shared when only 12 is available? The answer is complicated, but in practice, California's share is prioritized because of the principle of senior rights. This comes from the prior appropriation doctrine, the foundation of Western water law. In the eastern United States, water rights usually follow the riparian rule, where owning land along a river gives you the right to use the water. But in the arid West, the rule is first in time, first in right. In the riparian system, water rights arise from the land's adjacency to the river. In prior appropriation, regardless of where the land is, you can divert and use the water. The right is tied to the water, not the land. This system was suitable for the relatively arid West, and local agriculture and infrastructure projects generally developed within this framework. Whoever first diverted and put the water to beneficial use gained the highest priority. These are the senior appropriators. Those who came later are junior appropriators. In times of shortage, juniors lose their supply before seniors do. California's large irrigation districts, like the Imperial Irrigation District, claimed their rights early in the 1900s, making them senior. If everything were left to prior appropriation, fast-growing states like California would take nearly everything. That is why the compact was created, to stop one state from dominating the river. Later agreements refined the details. The 1948 Upper Basin Compact divided the northern states. In 1964, the Supreme Court case Arizona versus California divided the lower basin's 7.5 million acre-feet. California's large early infrastructure and population growth gave it the largest slice. The compact gave each state a set volume of water, but who actually gets to use it depends on state water laws, mostly the first-in-time, first-in-right rule, and federal delivery contracts. In droughts, junior users lose water first, while seniors are mostly protected. For example, when Lake Mead and Lake Powell reached record low levels in 2021, the Bureau of Reclamation issued a shortage declaration and began temporarily restricting deliveries to the upper basin states. Arizona's supply was cut by 18% and Nevada's by 7%. California, however, was exempt due to the seniority principle of Western water law. But the system also ignored Native American tribes. In 1908, the Supreme Court's Winters decision had affirmed that tribes automatically had reserved water rights when reservations were established. But in 1922, tribes were left out of compact negotiations. They were not full citizens, and their rights were not quantified. For decades, tribes had to fight in courts and settlements to secure their share. Some won large amounts, but many still lack access to the water they are legally entitled to. This historic exclusion has become a major injustice in today's crisis. This complex water distribution system also blocks the conservation that needs to be implemented. Rights holders want to use their full rights. The structure of water law also makes conservation difficult. Many users are required to prove full use of their rights. If they do not, they risk losing them. This creates a perverse incentive to use as much as possible. The beneficial use concept is defined by laws, but in practice, what counts as waste is debatable. Some irrigators even avoid efficiency upgrades, reasoning that evaporation or seepage losses still count as their beneficial use. Cutting agricultural water means lost farm income, fewer jobs, and shocks to the local economy. That is why many farming regions resist conservation programs. Proposals like fallowing fields for a season, even voluntarily, spark heated debates. This balance of social and political pressures is another obstacle to managing the river. The great dams of the river also reshaped everything. Hoover Dam created Lake Mead, holding back 32 billion cubic meters of water. Glen Canyon Dam created Lake Powell as a backup for the upper basin. Together, they generate about 10 billion kilowatt hours of electricity a year. but they also cut off the flow to the delta, destroying much of its ecosystem. Many experts consider Hoover and Glen Canyon the greatest single blow to the Colorado Delta. Other dams played a role too. The Morelos Dam, built at the US-Mexico border in the 1940s, diverts almost all remaining flow into Mexico's irrigation canals. Still, experiments have shown that restoration is possible. In 2014, the US and Mexico agreed to a pulse flow under minute 319. For the first time in decades, the river briefly reached the sea. In 2021, a smaller release followed. These flows revived patches of vegetation and bird life, proving that with regular water, even the delta could recover. But for that, permanent commitments are needed. To save the Colorado River, states, the federal government, and civil society are taking various steps. These steps generally focus on water conservation, new technologies, and policy regulations. In 2019, the 7 states and the federal government agreed on drought contingency plans, setting rules for coordinated cutbacks. The goal was simple: to create a common framework for how the upper and lower basins would coordinate to prevent Lake Powell and Lake Mead from falling to critical levels. These plans envisioned tighter monitoring of river operations, who would make how much cut when certain thresholds are reached, and activating voluntary programs to protect reservoirs. This step provided a legal ground for more stable management of the system in the short term. As the drought continued in the following years, the Bureau of Reclamation and the states began declaring water shortages starting in 2021. These declarations are made in tiers. For example, in 2022, a Tier 1 shortage was declared for the lower basin, which meant cuts for users like Arizona. In 2023, California, Arizona, and Nevada proposed a joint plan to conserve at least 3 million acre-feet through 2026. This proposal was supported by the White House and the Department of the Interior as a consensus-based solution. Important point: part of this conserved volume will be compensated with federal funds, meaning states and local users will receive payments in exchange for water release or efficiency projects. This proposal became one of the preferred options in the near-term environmental review. Agreements were made at the federal level with some tribes like the Gila River Indian community. With these agreements, some tribes agreed to leave water in reservoirs or provide water conservation through infrastructure investments, and received federal support in return. In the same period, states and irrigation districts agreed on voluntary programs such as temporary fallowing of fields, use of reclaimed water, and network efficiency investments. The common feature of these applications is paying the user or providing infrastructure funds to actually turn water into conservation. Thus, both farmers' income losses are tried to be limited, and emergency protection is provided in reservoirs. These short-term measures aim to stabilize reservoirs, keep power generation running, and fulfill legal delivery obligations. But 2026 is a turning point. The interim guidelines expire then, and new rules must be negotiated. A summary of some long-term options discussed on the table is as follows: redefining reservoir operating regimes, Lake Powell, Lake Mead coordination, sharing economic burden in both upper and lower basins with a shared risk logic, accounting for evaporation and transmission losses, wider-scale paid agricultural fallowing and spreading of water market tools, or a much more radical change like a flow-based plan, based on the river's natural flow. Each option has winners and losers. Upper basin defends more compact compliance. Lower basin defends fair distribution of existing demands. So political consensus is difficult, but necessary. The way out of the crisis requires both immediate action and a long-term system that is fair and adaptable. So what do you think is the real path to saving the Colorado River? Tougher cuts, agricultural reforms, or an entirely new way of sharing water? Share your thoughts with us, and let's discuss the healthiest path forward together. See you in the next video.